everyone. Welcome to Novel Ideas, a podcast where we talk with political professionals about creating a new playbook for democratic media. We talk with our industry's best and brightest to amplify the new strategies that we need to win, because we know we can't win the future with the same old playbooks of the past. I'm Rachel Campbell, an industry veteran of politics and digital media. I'm CEO at Novel Messaging, and I really love talking with smart people and turning hot takes into action. So that's what we're here to do today with our guest, MacKenzie Pino. Welcome, MacKenzie. A quick little bit of introduction to MacKenzie. She's the director of Politics and Advocacy at MIQ, which is a nonpartisan programmatic media partner for marketers and agencies. MacKenzie has over a decade of experience in politics, data analytics, and advertising across digital and traditional media, and she focuses on fueling data-driven strategies for some of the biggest names in politics, advocacy, and nonprofits. She studied at the Ford School of Public Policy at University of Michigan and holds a master's in integrated marketing from Georgetown University. Welcome, MacKenzie.
Thank you so much, Rachel. Excited to be here.
Yeah. MacKenzie and I have been chatting for many years at this point, and it's really, I will just say, it's always my favorite when I get to talk to you because you have such a unique seat where a lot of our audience may not be familiar with you, but anybody who does media work in democratic politics knows you very well. And you are one of these people who has like a bird's eye view into a lot of programs and a lot of agencies, and just, you know, you have like a real insider's view on how this work gets done. So I'm very excited to dig in. Before we do, we like to ask everybody to start. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us how you come to this work, how you got involved in this work, and why you stay in it.
Again, very excited to be here. Thanks, Rachel, and thanks for that intro. On how I got into this work, I usually answer that question by talking about my mom. I grew up in Michigan, and she worked in local parks and local politics. You can really think of her as the Leslie Knope of Ann Arbor.
Yes.
Um, she really is. But that meant that I grew up going to city council meetings and saw a pretty direct line between, the work of government and the impact that it could have on people's lives. And growing up in that household obviously shaped a lot of my worldview and led me to this path today. So I went on to study public policy at Michigan. Got to give a Go Blue shout out.
I'm married to a Spartan, so I have to
I
answer
know.
with a Go Green. Okay.
I know we'll never agree there, but that's okay.
It's all right.
But I studied public policy, and I kind of fell into the politics and paid media side in my early years in DC. And really, I would say over the last decade, I have developed a love for the broader marketing and ad tech world. I think that space is so dense and complex, and there's so many creative and solution-oriented people here, and I love it. And it is always changing. There's always something new keeping me on my toes. So for the last 4 years, I've worked for MIQ and led the political team here in DC, where I get to take some of the best ad solutions products from our global MIQ team and minds and bring them to our political clients and help make an impact for their campaigns.
Yeah. And I think one thing that, my years in political media have taught me is that we think we're a big deal. And, our big spenders are spending hundreds of millions of dollars this presidential cycle. The campaign spent, we were spending billions of dollars this cycle. And to us, we're like, oh, can you believe all this money? And then you talk to people like you who have a line of sight into like the global advertising market, the private sector advertising market, and we are like tiny fish in this big ocean. Yeah.
Yes, a drop in the ocean. And I will say there's 11 billion is no number to sneeze at for the 24. I believe that was the Ad Impact 2024 election cycle spend figure. But it is interesting, and I really enjoy sort of keeping tabs on the corporate side of marketing and advertising. I mean, we're just getting off of Cannes and seeing some of the, arguably a little bit of I don't want to necessarily use the word boondoggle, but a fun time for people who get to attend. But also, it is a great opportunity and a great time of the year to see some of the incredible innovative products and ideas that creators and companies are putting out there. And I think this is an industry where people really thrive on that creativity. And I enjoy our little political slice of it. So
Yeah, yeah. Even if we come a few years later than the rest of the industry, we'll get there. We usually and eventually. Okay, so speaking of, we like to start by asking everybody to sort of share with us one problem that they see facing our industry, facing folks who are working in democratic media. What's one problem that you think more people need to be paying attention to, or you wish more people understood?
well, this is not going to be a hot take for anyone who knows me or works in the digital space, but I think that problem I would say is media budgets are not keeping pace with voter consumption habits. That's the high level, right? That's the top line. I know I'm not going to get pushback from you on that, but I also, I want to talk about a little bit about why I think that's the case, because
Yeah,
I think there's a number of factors that make it, it is not just waving a magic wand or getting the right person on the horn to change that.
right.
Um, and I think I want to start, if I can, by acknowledging some of that discrepancy and talking about some of the levels of spending versus where people are spending their time. So that 11 billion number, that's big 2024 sort of all political paid media, according to Ad Impact.
Yep.
They estimated 5.3 million of that was spent on broadcast, on linear television.
Million or
I'm
billion?
sorry, 5.3 billion.
Okay, okay, okay.
Thank you for that catch. 5.3 billion spent on broadcast, not
Yep,
including cable,
yep.
and 2.3 billion spent on CTV.
Okay.
Now, that might sound like a big number on CTV, 2.3 billion, and it is compared to years past, cycles past, but it is also very far out of whack when you consider that 45%, over 45% of TV time spent in in the US is spent on CTV. And yet less than half of that broadcast spending is being spent on CTV, even though nearly half of people's time is being spent there. There's a lot of factors to get in, but like at a high level, I think we have to acknowledge how big of a gap that is. And that 2.3 billion number also includes YouTube, which I think is important to note because that's a big piece of the puzzle as well.
They're counting YouTube as CTV, not separating it.
Counting it in that CTV bucket, it is, obviously YouTube, there's a lot of different devices and formats you can run there, but we are now at the point where the majority of YouTube impressions are being viewed on the big screen in the house,
Yep.
which is new. I mean, that didn't used to be the case. I think people used to think of, and some people still do think of YouTube as cat videos on your phone. And we're now at a place where the majority of impressions are running on the big screen in the living room.
There are like 6 or more really big important ideas in what you just said. So I want to just like walk it back. So I'm going to spell this out because I know what you're saying. I recognize a Nielsen gauge number when I hear it. I see all of this. But I think a lot of people who we hope are listening to this might need it broken down because they aren't as familiar with some of this paid media stuff. So what we're talking about is we have data on how average Americans consume media and where they spend their time with media. Those trends have been changing to the point where now, if I'm citing this back to you correctly, around 45% of time spent watching television is watching streaming television, which includes YouTube. But
Correct.
when we analyze where the media dollars went in the 2024 cycle, we are still spending about double of what we spend on CTV, we're spending on traditional TV, despite the fact that the time spent with traditional TV is shrinking.
Correct. Yep. That's exactly right.
Okay.
And
There's reasons for this. Let's get into it. Let's get into
into
it.
it.
I mean, some of it is broadcast is more expensive. So to run there is always going to be a higher dollar amount. And there are certain demographics that continue to watch a lot of broadcast television. But I think people are often surprised at how far reaching the shifts in behavior are. Like, it's not just, I mean, typically older people, people 55 and older, are continue to watch the TV the same way they have their entire lives, which is through broadcasting cable. But that's changing. Even older audiences are making the switch to streaming now, right?
It's absolutely changing. Yes, older audiences are making the shift to streaming. Older audiences are found on streaming apps and on YouTube. We actually ran sort of a case study. This was actually in 2021, where we compared, at MIQ, worked with a client of ours, where we compared the reach of their linear campaign and the reach of the YouTube campaign, and looked demographically across gender and age groups where we were reaching more people with YouTube, knowing that the broadcast program that they had put together was very robust, was a statewide campaign, and had considerable reach. We knew YouTube, everyone watches YouTube, and we knew that there was going to be additional households we could reach on YouTube that we weren't finding on, that they were not finding on broadcast. So we did this incremental reach comparison, and we actually found there was not a single age or gender breakout that we were not reaching an additional 70% of on top of that broadcast reach, even for households 65 plus. So you're still getting incremental reach. People are still watching YouTube. Again, keep in mind, this is all still on that TV screen. We were just looking at CTVs. And habits are changing across the board. And you bring up a good point. There are still some trends, on the whole, older households do tend to be less likely to watch streaming than young ones that are either primarily or only streaming households. But there are very few households that in the US do not have a CTV today. There are very few households in the US that are not doing some form of streaming on that television screen.
And especially when you count YouTube as part of this.
Right.
And you said this, and I just want to underscore this again. I think people think YouTube ads are primarily viewed on mobile, and that has not been the case for at least 2 cycles, as far as I know. The majority of YouTube ad impressions are served on television screens. So when you hear people talk about YouTube as TV, I mean, that's just the advertising. That's not even talking about just how people are watching content, but people are watching YouTube on their televisions. That's how people are using it now.
Yes.
Okay, so what is TV now, MacKenzie?
Get philosophical with it. Everything is TV.
Everything is TV.
And I'm not just gonna say YouTube is TV. I'm not just gonna say streaming is TV. I'm gonna say TikTok is TV, Reels is TV, Shorts, YouTube Shorts is TV. Short form video has taken over in a huge way in the last arguably 4 years, but definitely 2, 3. The expansion of people's consumption of short form video has been bigger than I ever would have predicted. And again, you and I are in this space every day. And there was I apologize, I don't recall who this came from at Netflix, but there was a member of senior leadership there that a couple months ago acknowledged that they were not competing with Peacock or Paramount or other streaming providers. They were competing with TikTok. And in my own life, and anecdotally, I would say the majority of people I know are consuming TV with another screen in their hand or in their view, right? And it is really, it just brings me back to everything is TV.
The problem is that in the old school days where broadcast and cable were TV,
Mhm.
the way you could advertise on broadcast signals, like literally it's a signal that is broadcast to a market, and you buy space and your ad is inserted into those ad breaks and it runs whether there's a, all the TVs are off and nobody sees it, you're paying to broadcast that signal. Now with streaming and with social, it's a totally different type of advertising where you're paying to serve an impression when somebody who is in your target demographic is engaged. But not every platform allows political advertisers. So everything is changing and everything is becoming TV, but not all of those platforms are available to us in politics. Like Netflix, we still can't advertise as political advertisers there. The list goes on. And even in the streaming space, luckily, obviously, we can advertise on YouTube, which is important because it's one of the biggest players in the streaming space. But there are other big players like Netflix and others where we can't even run. So we aren't able to get the same, I don't know if coverage or penetration is the right word.
Yeah.
And things continue to change. And also all these media companies keep merging and rebranding and launching new apps. And like, it just feels like we went from a very set and static landscape for decades. And the past like 5, maybe 10 years has felt like a tornado of like activity. And I don't think a lot of people like, I think there's like sorry, this is going in all sorts of directions, but I
I'm
just
with you.
want to hear your take on like,
Yeah.
I think there's an instinct to wait till the dust settles and then figure out what it is. But I don't think we can do that. I think we have to like keep engaging and like learn as we go. I don't know. How do you think about that?
I'm completely with you. I clients who know me well have heard me say I think this is the hardest time it has ever been to buy TV. This is the hardest it has ever been to buy TV because it is so complex, because it is so fragmented, and because things are shifting, and there are a lot of, in particular for the political industry, there are a lot of companies that are hesitant to jump into the political space. Netflix is one. Amazon Prime is another. Prime Video, I should say, are two of the top five streaming apps where people are spending their time, and they don't accept political advertising. And the interesting thing is you've given three of sort of the top of all of the pushback or objections that I hear to buying CTV. I've heard three of them so far from you. One is, well, there are certain demographics, particularly older individuals who are high propensity voters often, who are still watching broadcasting cable. So we have to be, we have to acknowledge that. Two, broadcasting cable, well, the reason more money is going there because it's more expensive to buy those eyeballs or those platforms. And then three, well, there are a lot of streaming apps where we're seeing people spend time on streaming, but the top couple of those you can't buy for political advertising anyway. So I'm actually not getting as much reach if I buy on streaming as if I buy on broadcasting cable. All valid concerns, and all things that in my opinion, experts that are buying political ads that are in the ad buying space have run the numbers on, done the math on, and also solved for. So first, I want to address the we already talked about the average age and consumption habits. People are streaming across all generations. I think the penetration question is a really good one, and it brings me back a little bit to this imbalance of spend and that challenge at the top. That we're not following as an industry. I think we can be doing a better job following voters' consumption habits. Of Netflix, the Nielsen gauge number most recently was 7.5% of all TV time towards Netflix. We have found that over 90% of Netflix viewers can be found on other platforms on the TV screen. A lot of that is going to be covered by Netflix. Some of that is going to be covered by other app names that respectfully, consultant class and political class
Drag us. It's fine, MacKenzie. Drag us.
may not be spending a lot of time on, but that doesn't mean that constituents aren't, that voters are
Are you
not.
talking about like fasts? Is that what we're talking
I'm
about
talking
here?
about fast apps. I'm
Right.
talking about the Tubies of the world,
Pluto,
the Plutos
Sling.
of the world. Exactly.
Okay.
And why are folks using those apps? Number one, I think during the pandemic in 2020, we're all sitting around on our couches scrolling through our TV screens, realizing that there's a dozen additional apps built into these TVs that we bought
Mm-hmm.
that have free programming and have programming that we want to see.
Mm-hmm.
The second is, quite frankly, we just came out of an election where it was the economy stupid, and there are a lot of people that are not paying, you know, an additional 10, an additional 30, an additional $50 a month on streaming services and are accepting ads instead.
Yep.
And those are platforms that provide that content and that do it at no or low additional charge to those households. And the other amazing fact, I love this, and I think there's I'm reminded of, or want to remind folks of the incredible, I was very impressed, Super Bowl ad from Tubi last year of the sitting on the remote. I don't know if you remember that, but it had everyone, the screen paused, the video paused, and it was almost as if you thought you had just sat on your remote and changed the channel during the Super Bowl. And in fact, it was built into the video, built into the ad. It was an ad for Tubi, and that was a huge kickoff moment for their marketing campaign. This year for the Super Bowl, nearly 1 in 6 households watched the Super Bowl on Tubi.
Yeah.
1 in 6.
Yeah.
It's incredible.
Yeah.
It's and you know, in my opinion, campaigns need to keep up with those habits from voters.
Yeah, this is the thing. Like, voter habits are changing rapidly. It makes our jobs harder, but it doesn't mean we get to just not do it. The one thing we shouldn't do is just keep doing the same thing when we know fewer and fewer audiences are reachable on those platforms. You know, I think there's a lot of political sort of best practice that is built around GRPs or points and competitive reporting and like good guy versus bad guy. Oh, they're spending 2,000 points a week, so we need to be spending, you know, 1,000,000 points a week, whatever. Like it's these sort of like norms were baked into so much of our culture, and all that's changing. And to your point, audiences are moving to stuff that we don't all use anymore. And so it feels questionable or risky or somehow like not as much of a sure thing, even though we have all these mountains of data, all this evidence. It's just like not what's done.
You're 100% right. And I will quote a gentleman that we both know and love who likes to say, no one ever got fired for buying 1,000 points of TV a week. You know, you're not breaking norms. You're not sort of sticking your neck out there for a campaign. And it's hard to change that sort of inertia. But I want to talk, and I should also know, and I should have, before I came on and gave some hot takes on traditional TV buying, I should note that is really where I got my start. I was a linear TV buyer, and that really is where I dove into the world of political media. Before I worked for on the cable rep side for a long time, so I know that side very well, and love everyone over there. But we have to be adjusting to where voters are spending their time, and I want to talk a little bit about the metrics that I think about when, and sort of the impact of that imbalanced spending, because GRIPS is gross rating points, which has for a long time been an indicator of sort of reach and frequency in a market that's sort of right sized for the market that you're spending in. groups has been a great sort of rule of thumb for a very long time. And as I said, it's giving you sort of that indication of reach and frequency for that market area. Today, a lot of digital buyers, we work in impressions.
Mm-hmm.
And impressions, it's an important number. It's an important figure. It is really hard for any one human to wrap their mind around the impact of 10 million impressions in a congressional
Right.
district. It's just hard for us to do. So I typically recommend, and the place I always come back to is to that reach and frequency.
Right.
Getting an understanding of, for your target audience, for your congressional district or statewide, wherever you're spending, getting a sense of what's my penetration, what's my reach into that audience, and what frequency level am I at with those potential voters. Those are, to me, are the North Stars that we should all be looking to when we are planning, activating, and measuring our campaigns. And the last point that I'll sort of make on that is we often are looking at an average frequency.
Mm-hmm.
And that average frequency can hide a lot because if you're reaching 400,000 people in a given week with your message, and on average, you're hitting them maybe 5 times or 7 times trying to burn in that creative, there might be some folks who saw your ad 15 times in that 1 week or 40 times in that 1 week across broadcast and cable and streaming and everything else. And then there might be some folks that you missed entirely, or maybe you hit once, or maybe you hit twice. And I think something that we've seen, and both parties post-election are trying to right size, is an understanding of who were those folks that were potentially oversaturated with our message. And to a certain point, you can consider that, in my mind, a little bit of media wastage, right? Like if I really only needed 12 frequency or 15 frequency to burn in my message that week, or to make sure that it was hitting home, and I hit them 40 times, those dollars could have been spent elsewhere.
Yeah.
And I probably would have liked them to have been spent against those eyeballs that might be harder to reach, but needed to hear my message a few more times in that week. And that, getting an understanding of that frequency across audiences, not just an average on the whole, but across those different audience pockets, while measuring against your reach over the course of a campaign, those are kind of the North Stars that I look to.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, 8 million questions. Well, and this is like a good pivot because, if the problem is our media, if we're defining a problem for discussion today as media dollars not keeping pace with changes in voter behavior and media consumption changes, we like to ask, so what's the solution? And I think you just told us, which is, the solution is we need to be paying attention to reach and frequency metrics in how we planning with different media, and running different kinds of campaigns that are kind of built. I think there's like a couple of core assumptions in what you're saying, which is different people. This is how I talk about it anyway. Different types of people watch different kinds of screens and watch different stuff. So where before media plans could just be a handful of tactics that would pretty much hit everybody, now media plans need a bunch of different tactics depending on all the different types of people you're trying to target. And also within that, we have to recognize that people interact with media in different ways, so that even if we're targeting women, 25 to 45 in these zip codes, we're going to hit some of those women way more, and it's going to be hard to find some of those women. I'm wondering if there are ways, like, is it frequency capping? Is it, I think it's also holding like the tension between the more granular you get in your audience targeting, sometimes the harder it is to get reach. If you draw your circle too narrow, it's harder to reach people. It makes it harder to serve. It drives up your cost to serve each impression. So it's like, do you have any advice for folks on trying to strike the balance between casting a wide enough net to get good reach versus being narrow and targeted?
It's a great question. You definitely hit on one of the challenges that buyers face today. in that perpetual balance of cost, reach, frequency, availability, right?
Right.
I think the answer I would give is audience-based buying is really the novel solution that I come to when I'm thinking about these challenges. And part of that is balancing the audience size, budget, frequency, and availability. But ultimately, having an audience-based buying approach, I think, is where you have to start.
Mm.
And when I say audience-based buying, I want to clarify for any listeners that, like, for a long time, the way we thought about buying, again, coming back to TV, the way that we thought about buying TV was content based, and it still is to a certain extent for a lot of folks. It is, we think that our voters that we want to target are watching Jeopardy. We need to place an ad in that 30-minute time slot 3 times a week to get that frequency with them. And that's still how you buy broadcast and cable TV. It's content based. Audience based buying is really flips that on its head and says, I have identified based on other data signals, whether it is a voter file, which we can come back to in a second, whether it is a voter file, whether it is a behavioral indicator, whether it is a geographic indicator, or heck, they live in this municipality and they are eligible to vote and we want to be hitting everybody. Whatever that indicator is, identifying that audience first and then delivering them ads wherever they may be, whatever content they may be consuming in your flight with that creative message. And you can put additional parameters on that. But that approach of audience-based buying, I think, is where you have to start, and is foundational in my mind. And really, the best way to go about that is using programmatic buying today. And programmatic, I think it has a certain connotation for many folks who have been in the ads industry for a long time. People think of programmatic as remnant display inventory, because that was really where it got its birth. But in reality, what many publishers have realized in the last 5 to 10 years, whether or not they have broadcast their intentions, they have realized that it is far more efficient for them to be offering and making available their inventory via programmatic ad buying than via direct IO.
Yeah.
So I can break that down if that's helpful, but I think the bottom line is that there is the inventory you want to buy is available. And it's really about taking that audience first approach.
I am not as technically savvy on some of these pieces as you or some of my friends in the buying space, but I always think about it like this. I have to explain it. I always start with explain it to me like I'm 5, and this is my
Yes.
5-year-old explanation. Programmatic buying used to kind of speak to a type of inventory, but now it speaks to the way media is bought and sold. It's like a system of buying that allows for more audience-based buying, and sort of the supply side is can be as broad as we want. I was always under the impression that there were some suppliers like Hulu and others that were cautious about putting some of their inventory into programmatic marketplaces, and that may or may not still be the case, although it does seem like trends are pointing to everything is moving to programmatic. So even if that is still the case, I don't expect it to stay that way for long. But basically, the companies put their impressions or their inventory up. The programmatic buying is the infrastructure or the interface that exists between that supply of inventory and the demand from people who want to buy it. And it lets you bid and buy for the inventory you want, and with the audience constraints that you input. And it doesn't have the same sort of like connotation around quality of inventory that it used to. And direct IOs, or direct insertion orders, was basically more like you walk up to the counter at the media store and say, I would like to buy these impressions, please. And they give you a piece of paper that says, we will sell you these impressions, and you sign, and that's how you buy. That's, again, like a much more old school way of doing
Yeah.
things, and things are moving more to this automated. I mean, like AI is coming into play with programmatic now, right? Like everything is like moving into this sort of automated, tech-driven, data-driven marketplace. And it feels like the suppliers, even like the Hulus, see that train on the tracks
Yeah.
and are now figuring out ways to get their inventory in. Is that right?
First of all, you nailed that explanation. That was perfect.
Okay.
So let me
I'm a
just
good
cut that and
student.
I'll send that. Yes, yes, that was you nailed that. That's exactly correct. And you also nailed the fact that publishers, it has completely changed. The supply landscape in the last 5 years has nearly done a 180 in the programmatic space. And it is because these publishers, Disney included, one, saw the programmatic industry go from 50 million, $20 billion a year to hundreds of billions of dollars a year globally.
Yeah.
It has absolutely exploded. It is the fastest growing um, uh, sort of corner of the advertising world today.
Yeah.
And publishers realized, well, the more ways I make my inventory accessible, the more money I make.
Yeah.
And that's their bottom line, right?
Yeah.
That is their bottom line. And you also, I think you very eloquently noted, it is about how you buy and not what you buy.
Hmm.
When you're thinking about programmatic, I like to give the analogy of, we used to, the way that people used to buy let's say Delta Airlines was running an ad campaign. They would call up the New York Times or the Washington Post and say, I'd like to place an ad in your travel section, hoping to hit people who might be traveling and might want to buy a airline ticket from Delta. Today, Delta would say, well, that's silly. Like, those people who are reading the travel section, they might be potential customers. But actually, I have data over here from
Mhm.
Google search or from the browsers and the cookies that that are attached to these users, to these potential customers, that just showed me 5 minutes ago someone who searched flights or where to travel this summer, right? Like,
Uh-huh.
that data, number one, is IP connected, cookie connected, with identifiers that are available online, where I can one-to-one say, that person who just searched summer hotspots to travel, I'm going to serve a Delta ad to,
Uh-huh.
instead of taking this stab in the dark on running in a travel section, running in a travel blog. Not to say that there aren't potential customers there, but the efficacy of your advertising, when you can tie it to other indicators, is so much more powerful.
You get access to that when you buy programmatically. You can access much stronger, more enriched data to inform your targeting. You also get better accountability and data on the back end on what ran, how it ran, where it ran. And so it's better for suppliers, it's better for customers or buyers. Um, and it's like, it feels, again, like to the point about being in sort of the midst of this, you know, massive change, and sort of like being in an era of the wild, wild west of media, where, legacy media companies are changing. And this is one of those big changes. Like, everyone's trying to figure out how to change the way we buy and sell media. And that's been messy and
Yeah,
hard. And
it
like,
has. It has.
but I think we're gonna come out better, right? Like, I think it's gotta be. Like,
100%. I believe I'm not an optimist in everything, but I'm an optimist in that. And I want to bring this back to political for a second,
yeah.
because I think something else, coming out of uh, the last election, to be honest, I think there are a lot of folks that this is a time to reevaluate strategies and to
Mhm.
reevaluate partners and the data and types of data that people are using and all of that. And I think one thing that I try and preach is, voters are people.
Mhm. Shocking.
And I know, hot, big news, big news. Voters are people, and people have a lot of other behaviors and opinions and habits beyond voting.
Yeah.
So I wanted to come back to your note on, that narrow audience, and I think the voter file is maybe where you are getting at with
Yeah.
that. There is a place in many most campaign strategies for the voter file, understanding who's registered with what party, with what voting history. There's absolutely value there. Being able to reach voters on that voter file is important. But I think if there's one thing that Democrats are looking around and saying to each other, it's that, well, we might have missed some folks that we should have been talking to last year. And we need to think about how we're going to identify those people and reach those people with our message, potentially a new message or a new messenger. But I think identifying and reaching that audience is part of the reevaluation that's happening for the Democratic Party this year. And there are a lot of other data signals out there
Yeah.
that we, as marketers, can be tapping.
Yeah.
Um,
It's
Go ahead.
philosophical and it's technical, right? Like
Yeah,
there are philosophical reasons about why we need to broaden who we think about targeting. And there are technical reasons too, which, when we talked a little bit about this in an earlier episode with Ryan Brown at Priorities, like, yeah.
I heard. Shout out
Okay.
to Ryan.
Yeah. So, and really, you could point to anybody who's been in charge of a paid media program in the last like 5 to 10 years, and they would probably have a similar take on this, which is it's not that we can't do it. We just shouldn't only do it because we're like essentially tying one arm behind our back and cutting the number of people we can talk to arbitrarily by half in some cases or worse. And um, just leaving a bunch of people on the table for chasing like a false sense of purity,
Yep.
honestly.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. And I think I'm encouraged by a lot of the conversations I've been having already this year around some of the data that my other teams at MIQ, our team accesses. There was a recent product rollout called MIQ Sigma that I think is right in line and in lockstep with this sort of more creative thinking that takes not only the TV watching data that we access that I think most clients in the space are familiar with, but also browsing data, online browsing data, and the big one for me, purchase data.
Mm,
What people are watching, browsing, and buying, all three of those can paint a much more robust and colorful picture
mhm.
of a potential audience than just the watching data, just the voter file. And I think I'm already having conversations with folks about how to get creative, particularly around some of that purchase behavior, to identify potential audiences, to also identify, how people are feeling about their finances this year,
Mhm. Mhm.
to identify sort of changes that they've made in the last 6 months, 12 months, and get again that more robust and colorful picture of potential voters.
Building an exclusion group for people buying like Trump crypto, Trump sneakers. No, I'm just
You
kidding.
can probably add a suppression audience for Democratic campaigns there and save yourself some money, but
Uh, but
exactly.
people who are buying you know, clean energy, like people who are putting solar panels on their house, people
Right.
who are interested in I think about this all the time. Like there are like little virtue signals that we all do in our everyday life and shopping behaviors and how, like home renovations, like what cleaning products you buy, like all this kind of stuff that like probably is a pretty good indicator about your value set, right? And we can be using that. We don't have to only just use crosstabs in a poll or even RCT message testing, which I am a big fan of, but like the data inputs we use to shape our strategy are so limited relative to the data inputs at our disposal.
Hit the nail on the head, in my opinion. Exactly right.
Okay, well, this is great. So, my last question before we can kind of jump to the hot takes, as if we haven't had a million hot takes already. What do you think for folks who are not in the paid media industry professionally, but who are doing advocacy work or doing political work, and they get a media plan sent to them? Like, what are some things to look at that would like help be indicators that their plan is aligned to what a good plan should be in this market?
Oh, that is a great question. Great question, Rachel. I think what I look for, what I think about in a media plan, especially if I'm not intimately familiar with the platforms, the restrictions, the geo potentially, and those habits, is for some of that logic behind the budget allocation and behind some of the goals. First things first, I look again, I come back to my North Stars of reach and frequency. I would look for those and look for those as as holistic of a manner as possible to for folks that are not as technically in the weeds. It is because of some of the walled gardens, because of some of the online identifiers and the data signals that exist in the industry, it is very challenging to get one single reach number. Here are all of the people on all of the platforms that you reached with your message. However, I would look for those numbers, reach and frequency, rolled up as much as possible. So across CTV apps, across TV, quite frankly, can someone be providing that across broadcast, cable, and streaming? And I would look for consumption habits side by side. Can you be providing some top line numbers alongside that budget allocation to give me that picture of where is my audience spending their time? What's that budget allocation that you are recommending? And where does that leave us for reach and frequency across those platforms? I would also challenge folks to build a digital first plan for first and foremost, or a streaming first plan, depending on budget levels and depending on the campaign and the message and all of that. But a digital first program first and foremost, because there are, from my experience, still a lot of individuals who think, okay, what does our broadcast budget need to be? Great, I'm allocating that. Now, what's the remaining budget I have to work with for streaming, for YouTube, for all of my social, let alone content creators and any of that paid, let alone search, let alone, depending on how many buckets you want to roll into that. So I would challenge folks to put digital first there.
Yeah, amen. I actually just had a really interesting conversation last week about this where I really think most serious people who are talking about building real media plans, the thing that has to go first in any media plan now is YouTube. You have to budget for that first. And broadcast is starting to switch to being, and if there's budget, can we do it to make a big splash or to drive home impact at a critical moment. But I think the days of people being deathly afraid to go dark on broadcast, I think we're out of those days. I think we need to think about broadcast as a big giant sledgehammer that you can swing at key moments. But it's not really even essential to an always on strategy. So anyway, I think there's debate on that, but I'm with you.
I would agree. And I also think, one of the things that a digital first strategy, in my opinion, allows you to do more of is opens up your timeline and the flexibility there, because also, we haven't really touched about over time and all of this that we've just discussed is happening in such a condensed period of time in every 2 years. And there is this, I think it's getting better, but historically week one was what amount of budget for folks? I mean, if you were a smaller campaign, you're only up for October through election day, maybe 40% of your budget, maybe more. And I think number one, early voting, the growth of early voting, of vote by mail has helped significantly. I think people are paying attention to dates earlier
Yep.
in the fall, which is great. But I also think we need more folks who are willing to test earlier spending and try to move the needle earlier in the year.
Yeah.
And being digital first, I think, gives you a little more flexibility to do that.
Yeah. Oh boy, it'd be so fun to get to like really run a media plan the way the data supports. It would be so great. Cool. Okay. So we're going to take things to the Hot Takes hotline.
Give us a call at the Hot Takes hotline.
We like to close every episode by playing a message. And for folks listening, please call us and share your hot takes at 1-844-4-HOT-TAKES. Call us. You've got 60 seconds. It's totally anonymous, and we'd love to hear what you have to say. So we're going to go now to a recent message that came in on the hotline that we wanted to share with you, MacKenzie.
Yeah. I work in the political media industry and follow novel messaging. My hot take is, on the Dem side especially, we have so much discussion around building a coalition, building a base, expanding our base, expanding back into audiences that we hadn't before, but yet the consultants are so reliant on first-party data, first-party lists, voter files that, I think we're losing the forest through the trees here and essentially missing out on so much. We need to be, of course, you got to use those voter files, but we have to be building strategies to build a bigger base and to reach people that maybe haven't voted before or only voted once in 2020. Essentially mimic what the Republicans are doing, but for a different kind of base. That's my hot take. Stop using first-party lists only. Expand into other things. Be bold. Be different.
I think it's so funny that we've already talked about this. There's another point in there that I want to unpack a little bit further, which is more about like expanding the tent versus, so we can get to that. But I just I just have to comment, like, this keeps coming up and it's coming in on the hotline. It's coming in from multiple guests now. It's like media professionals are traumatized by the voter file in this industry. There's just such a chokehold that the voter file has on how Democrats conceive of our jobs, which is, there's pros and cons. It's like, obviously no one here is saying we shouldn't use a voter file, right? Like it does, but it's also, I think, underscores like an organizing and field mentality to democratic politics, because the voter file is really helpful when you're trying to knock doors and you don't want to knock on the door of somebody who's not even registered to vote. But media doesn't work like that. And we keep trying to apply this. When we say first party, we mean like a list that you provide. And in democratic politics, the first party data most campaigns are supplying is a voter file. And there's like this whole industry built out around building modeled scores, and we only want to reach people with a score of 80 or higher and all this stuff. And the ugly truth that most people who don't work in media don't understand is the media tools that we have to work with to reach people are not built to work with this kind of data, and they don't give a flip about your modeled scores. And so the choice effectively comes down to, do you want to talk to anybody or do you only want to talk to the exact right people? Guess what? We can't really ever promise that you're going to reach this exact right people. And it doesn't stop people from spending hundreds of thousands of dollars or more, millions of dollars per cycle on these lists and these scores and this data, even though the reality is it's not super usable, or it's usable but with a lot of trade-offs. Anyway, can you unpack that a little bit?
I think the word you landed on there of trade-offs is exactly right. And it is, and ultimately that's what campaigns are doing every day. is they are navigating those trade-offs and making those decisions. But I also, I think it's funny that we've already, obviously I would agree with the caller, and I know that it's come up previously on this pod, and I think it's because there are a lot of Democrats that are looking around and saying, were we just like not talking to men under 40 at all? Or any of these people that we thought for whatever reason we didn't need to be speaking with, or they weren't built into our plan enough, or receive enough resourcing there. And I would also, I would argue it's been a little bit of a theme in quite frankly, the Trump era of politics, that he has built a coalition of an unpredictable, in some ways, coalition. Maybe not unpredictable, but unexpected. Yeah, prior to really 2016, an unexpected coalition has flipped voting expectations on their head quite a bit. And I would say because of that, it has, I think, the Democratic Party scratching heads a little bit and saying like, but what, who do we need to be talking to that we're not?
Yeah.
And I think the voter file is a place to start for sure. The other thing I would note on that, and sort of on your rundown there, is there was I believe it was a New York Times article that came out post-election on the way that the Trump campaign used the voter file and used voter file data in their media targeting strategy. And in particular, please correct me if I'm getting this slightly wrong, but what stood out to me there's a lot in that article. What stood out to me there was one of the areas that they focused a lot of digital resourcing, but also door knocking and mail, was with voters who were lower propensity historically, who had not turned out before, but were giving other behavioral or other indicators from their data that they may be amenable to Trump's message.
Yep.
And if that is not, a place that I think the Democratic Party needs to look in the mirror, then I don't know what is. So it keeps coming back.
No, totally. I think that article haunts a lot of our dreams. I think because like it's not that we don't use voter file targeting and how we target CTV and streaming and all that. Obviously, we're like traumatized by the extent to which people are obsessed with using it. But I think it's asking the right questions of the data and using the data as part of like the right strategy, right? And I think there's a like a chasing of purity thing that happens on the left in terms of language, in terms of ideology, and in terms of data and targeting. And instead of using it to inform outreach and expansion, we're using it to like get narrower and smaller. And turns out can't win that way.
Right.
So
right. No, I think you're exactly right. And I think the other thing this comes back to is understanding voters as people, and not just the primary defining factor not being their voting history, even if that has been the case in the past. And quite frankly, registered partisanship, if you're getting that from states, while I think everyone would largely agree that identity politics is, I was going to say alive and well, but beyond that, I mean, we are living in an age of identity politics in many ways. I also think there are select political issues that are drawing new lines for people, whether it is health related, whether it is immigration related. Both of those issues, again, I think were key areas and continue to be key areas where the Republican Party has pulled new voters into that tent.
Yeah.
And the Democratic Party has lost support. And that is a clear divergence that we will see between voting history or even registered partisanship and other actions and behaviors that people are taking that can be an indicator for campaigns this cycle.
Yeah. Yeah, we got a lot to figure out, the least of which is like how we use first party data in our ad targeting. Okay, this has been so great. I really hope that this is helpful for folks who don't like look at line item media plans all day like the two of us. But I really appreciate you taking the time. For folks who are listening, if you want to follow MacKenzie, you can find her on LinkedIn, and you can check out MIQ at wearemiq.com. You can make sure to follow this podcast for more conversations like this at novelmessaging.substack.com, and we're at Novel Messaging on YouTube. And a final plug, if this brought up any trauma or triggers for you, you're welcome to call the Hot Takes hotline and tell us all about it at 1-844-4-HOT-TAKES. We really look forward to hearing from you. And thanks again, MacKenzie. Thanks so much for being here.